All right, here we go. I talked about non-conscious processing in the introduction and how important it became to the study of psychology, social psychology, and let's talk about stimuli processing. This, of course, supports one of your activities as well. Let me check. I'm not sure that this is running right now. Yeah, we're good. Sorry for that. My other camera has an articulating screen, so I can see the screen and I can know that it's recording. I can't use that one because it doesn't interface with this microphone, so I got some technical issues to work out. In fact, this morning when I started these, it was about an hour of technical bullshit to get started. So let's talk stimuli processing, conscious and non-conscious. So think about this in terms of seeking out a stimuli and how it affects you in the assignment on Carmen. We're going to talk a little social cognition here. I love this wheel. I use this wheel in a lot of classes. Influences and results of social cognition. If you want the wheel of your life, if you want what your life does, this is it. This is you, 24/7, 365 for your entire frickin' life, right? So let's begin here. And I like to begin here because goals, motivation, and emotion, in case you're another advertisement, so hang on here for a minute. I teach psychology of motivation. It's typically offered in the spring. I teach psychology of emotion, which is offered typically fall and spring, right? Two different courses. But this is the goals, motivation, and emotion. So when we talk motivated reasoning, for example, this is where it begins. And this is kind of part of that executive function as I was discussing about Denning. So goals, motivation, and emotion then influence what we pay attention to. So if my gas gauge is flirting towards E, I'm on a road trip, and my gas gauge is going towards empty, right? My attention is going to be directed to finding gas. That is, I'm more likely to notice gas stations or, those horrible situations when there's a lack of gas stations. Now contrast that to if my motivation is primarily that not my gas tank, but my belly is empty. Hard to believe looking at this, right? But that then I'm more likely to notice places where I can purchase food. So this is one of the beauties of our brain. Remember, your brain has your back, especially your non-conscious mind is constantly monitoring the environment to help you fulfill your needs and goals. So I'm hungry, I notice fast food restaurants, right? That's where my selective attention, I notice those, and my comprehension is around that. This leads to memory, encoding and simplification. So you probably remember that from your chapter on memory in Psych 1100, right? Encoding and simplification gets it prepared for memory, and then we draw the contents of memory in terms of cognitive output, that is thoughts or behavioral outputs are a result of the memories re-emerging. Now, what we think or what we do then affects our current goal, motivation, and emotional state. So we just spin around the wheel. We spin around the wheel. Now, what do we attend to? There's a couple basic rules that we can share. What are we more likely to attend to or notice in our environment? Stuff that's new. New has to be processed. We have to understand what it is. Remember, Dunning said the executive has a desire for knowledge. So novel stimuli, right, is just about that, learning what it is. Now, brighter moving stimuli have a higher noticing threshold. Why would moving stimuli be so important? Evolutionary psychology to the rescue, right? That is, if it's moving, there's two opportunities available here when it's moving. It could eat me or I could eat it. So stuff that moves has a special attentional kind of salience. Unusually dispositional or situationally, and we're going to talk about this when we get to person perception. If someone comes into a movie theater, right, what am I supposed to do in a movie theater? I'm supposed to look around for a seat. When I find a seat, I'm supposed to sit the hell down with my popcorn and my drink, right? But what happens if someone comes into the movie theater, jumps up on their seat, throws their popcorn in the air, and says, "Holy shit, I love movies!" And we're all going to focus our attention on that because that is different, right? It's unusual dispositionally and or situationally in that example. Anything that's extreme tends to attract our attention over what's less extreme. It's, you know, a super tall person, someone who's 7 foot tall. You go to a party and there's a 7 foot tall person. You're going to notice them right off the bat, right? Those of us who are like 5'8", 5'9", not likely to get noticed in a sea of other 5'8" or 5'9" people. Although 5'8" is pretty short, so a lot of times I get noticed because I might be the shortest person in the room, right? Is that correct, Electron? Yeah. Okay. Visually dominant, things that are in front. And think, you know, a lot of these rules were developed by who? And you probably didn't talk about them too much in Psych 1100. They're kind of the lost group of psychologists, or the Gestalt psychologists, that talked especially about illusions, visual illusions, and processing the whole. Regardless, useful stimuli, and this gets us back to the motivated idea, that useful stimuli have a higher motivational potential, or my motivation motivates me to find stimuli that are useful to my current state or my current needs. Okay? Now, with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about priming and automaticity. How do we study non-conscious effects? Well, we study the unconscious, the non-conscious in the laboratory. I'm going to prefer non-conscious, and I'll probably go with that from here on out. The ways that internal mental states mediate in passive and hidden manner, that's the non-conscious, passive and hidden, non-conscious, the effects of social environment on psychological processes or responses. So what we see then is we're constantly exposed to stimuli, and we process a small portion of the stimuli consciously, but it's the non-conscious that is the big stimuli processor. And it's processing all this stuff outside our awareness. And when the non-conscious says, based on our past experience, our memory, our current need or motivation state, the non-conscious says, that stimuli looks like it might be useful, then it pushes that stimuli's presence into our conscious awareness, right? So the non-conscious ultimately has your back. It's always trying to do the best for you. There could be problems, maybe not, right? So, who are these people? Remember I mentioned John Barge a little earlier as writing the book The New Unconscious. Well, this is John Barge from NYU, and this is his graduate student, Tanya Chartrand, who became a professor at Ohio State Social Psychology. So we were really fortunate because Tanya came when I was, in my first or second year. She came to Ohio State Social Psychology, and she taught a graduate level seminar on automaticity, and holy guacamole, all the first year and second year social psych graduate students take this course together, right? Required course. It blew our minds. And most of us did research that then dealt with priming effects. And I'm going to show you a little of that here and how we affect the non-conscious. So, circa 2001 here. Relationship of automatic process then to behavior and cognition. Automatic processes are habitual responses to environmental stimuli. So think about something that causes you to act, right, without really thinking about it. And I think I used the example in the assignment that you're going to need to do, right? I used to be a cigarette smoker. I don't know, I probably smoked cigarettes for 25, 30 years of my life off and on. I haven't smoked in like 10, 12 years now, which is a good thing. I think is a really good thing. But for example, and I write about this in the example, the telephone rings, right? Before I can answer that phone, I got to reach for a cigarette because smoking while talking on the phone were linked behaviorally, right? So the stimuli is the phone that enacts the behavior of grabbing a cigarette, even before I grab the phone. Fascinating, right? So automatic processes are habitual responses to environmental stimuli. Are any of you athletes? Right? Or what you do then is you rehearse, so that your performance becomes automatic so you don't have to think about it. Think about driving the first time you ever drove when you're learning to drive. It's like, oh my God, nothing is automatic. Everything is effortful. You might sweat, you might be anxious, you might have a really hard time. But once you learn how to drive and you become habitual in all the behaviors that are driving, then you can drive without even thinking about it. So this is one of the beauties of learning. Learning takes an unfamiliar task, and once we learn it, makes it habitual, makes it a learned task. Now, the stimuli that we encounter may be either non-consciously or consciously processed. Typically, it's non-consciously processed, and then that's pushed into consciousness, but we're getting a little bit out of my field there. Probably need to talk to someone who's more in involved with sensation and perception at a deeper level. And like, you could take one of Dr. Meyer's classes in that regard. She'll tell you a lot about it. If we're not mindful of the potential effect of the stimuli, we're unlikely to be able to stop and modify the process. And that I've been stressing mindfulness, and you'll see it in your assignments, is becoming mindful of the stimuli and how they affect you. It's like the non-conscious takes over and habit rules, right? Well, some of us are urging that, whoa, break that link and become more mindful, become more conscious, right? Rather than operating necessarily on autopilot. So this ironic process control presents a dual process model, and I think this is a lot of fun. We try to suppress a thought consciously. We say, I don't think about that anymore. And we automatically then monitor our thinking process to make sure that we're successfully not thinking about it. And you can see why this is an ironic process, because I say, I'm not going to think about that, and then I check, are you thinking about that, Mark? And it's like, shit. Now I just reminded myself of it, and we get in this loop where we can't get out of it. For example, and this comes to us from Dwayne Wegner, so let's try it out. For the next 20 seconds, whatever you do not think about a white bear. And notice how this ties a lot of concepts together, because the goal is to not think about a white bear. My current goal is to not think about a white bear. How do I know that I'm fulfilling my goal? I have to check to see that I'm not thinking about a white bear, and as soon as I check to see I'm not thinking about a white bear, then of course I've thought about a white bear, I've reminded myself, and we go through this loop. Right? So what's the defense here? What mechanism can we use? Typically the recommendation I've been given by students is, well, I was successful in not thinking about a white bear because I thought about something else. Okay? So we might offer a distractor. Now, to combat mental contamination, we're going to borrow from these two guys, Wilson and Brecky, and they're going to give us a process, and this is one of the first process models that we're going to look at in this class. And the way this works is it's a multi-step process. If I am exposed to a stimuli that causes mental contamination, makes me think in a way that I'd prefer not to think, how the hell can I get out of it? And Wilson and Brecky say you have to fulfill these steps. So let's first have an unwanted mental process triggered. Okay. That is, let's suppose I have some piece of evidence as a juror that I heard, right, that has now biased me against the defendant. And I'm like, boy, I'm supposed to be fair, right? So that is, I'm aware that this piece of evidence might have biased me against them. So I became aware, right? And once I become aware, then I say, yeah, but I'm a juror and I'm supposed to be fair-minded, not biased. So that's where the motivation comes in. So let's look at the process. Boy, I'm aware this piece of information might have biased me. Well, if I don't give a shit, it's like, I don't care though. If I'm biased, so be it, right? Hang 'em high, right? But if I'm motivated to correct, say, wait a second, that piece of information might have biased me towards a conclusion of guilt when it's not appropriate, then I'm motivated to correct. Now, being motivated to correct, that's awesome. Now, we did some research in our lab about punishment preferences, etc. That is, we find that people are almost always aware, if they're motivated to correct, they're almost always aware correctly that they were motivated against or for. So the direction of the bias for or against, that's pretty clear. People are good with that. But what people had a problem with in our studies was the magnitude of the correction. That is, how much do I correct? I mean, I realize I'm biased, but now how do I correct for that bias in degree? Okay? And that was more problematic, and our research demonstrates that people almost always fall short in their correction. That is, they don't correct enough. So, and then you got to be able to adjust, and this is where time pressure comes in, because sometimes you're not able to make the adjustment, right? Because you don't have time to. Your boss calls you up and says, have you hired anyone? And you say, well, I'm struggling with maybe, and then the boss says, I don't want to hear your struggles. I want you to make a decision by the end of the day. And then you say, oh, well, I better just go with my gut and hire this person. And then you apply the correction. So notice, to apply the correction, this kind of psychological step-by-step process model says these have to be fulfilled before a correction can be applied. If any one of these breaks down, then the correction won't be applied. Okay? couple other automatic processes we should talk about pretty quickly. People tend to automatically mimic each other. We have mirror neurons that facilitate this from the time we're born, but there's also a social aspect to it. It fosters liking between people. So Chartrand and Tanya's dissertation research set up mimicry versus non-mimicry conditions, and what they found is in the mimicry condition, then the person who mimicked the participant was better liked as a result of the mimicry. So we tend to act like our friends or our partners over time because it kind of greases the wheel of successful, smooth relationships. Now, where do automatic effects come from? Well, some are chronic, and Dodge demonstrated that some people are chronically aggressive. Aggression is just kind of their go-to. So what do we see? When aggressive children were shown videos of two people interacting, and it wasn't clear the nature of the interaction at all, right? But aggressive children rated the interaction as aggressive because they're chronically predisposed to see aggression, even though it might not exist. Depression. Aaron Beck, kind of the father of depression research, said, look, the people who are depressed see the world as a glass half empty. They tend to be pessimistic, and it reinforces their depression. Now, fortunately for us, we can manipulate people's mindsets in the laboratory through this process called priming, right? So we can create situations that dispose a person to operate in one way or another. It's never 100%. Remember, there's individual differences. But on average, we can create manipulations in the laboratory, and I've done this when we're doing punishment research. I've created manipulations that made people either want to punish more or to punish less. And it's done outside their awareness. Now, accessibility is the key. So let's suppose that I want to prime you to buy a soda in the movie theater at intermission, which doesn't exist anymore, but let's just suppose intermission still existed. What if I take a frame of a nice frosty Coca-Cola and insert one frame every 24 frames in the film? And that's how film runs. 1 second of film is 24 frames, right? And one frame is frosty Coca-Cola stuck in there, right? And it goes into your non-conscious, it processes, but your conscious mind can't see it because it's happening at an interval that's too short. Will you buy more Coca-Cola? No. Because it might not be accessible. It might not be applicable. You might not be thirsty, right? So it's especially powerful, though, when interpreting ambiguous stimuli. I think it's time for an example. Okay? Let me ask you, what is this person feeling towards that person? And this is a cartoon I used in my dissertation research. This was one of the last frames. So what is person A feeling towards person B? And of course it's impossible to say because they have no frickin' faces, so we can't read the face to tell what the emotion is. So people say, I don't know. And I said, but if you had to guess. And really the idea was, if I prime people to be angry outside of their awareness, will they think that this person is angry towards this person? Whereas other participants that I prime to be happy, will they think this person is happy? That is, the prime affects people's non-conscious judgments in an ambiguous situation. So how is this done? Well, superluminally. Superluminally is a fancy word that means when I'm priming a participant in the laboratory, they are aware of the stimulus, they see the stimulus, but they don't know how it's going to impact their subsequent judgment. Okay? Subliminally, they're not conscious of the stimuli at all, which would be like the movie theater and the film. So let's look at some superluminal priming techniques, right? So this was a fill-in-the-word puzzle. This was used in Ken Fujita's lab, if I'm not mistaken. They study motivation, non-conscious motivation there. And the participant is given this, and they have to fill in the blanks. So the first word, of course, is motivate, crayon, goal, effort, sandwich. What's the common theme? 3 words, all tilt towards the same theme. Motivation, goal, effort, right? And then they would see how people would function on a task. People who are given this puzzle should persevere longer. They should expend more effort at the task. They should be more highly motivated because this has primed them. Now, if they were aware that, hey, I'm going to give you these words that are associated with motivation and that's going to make you work harder on the task, then the person's going to say, no, not so much. It has to happen outside of awareness. Let's try another one. This is a scrambled sentence task. Remove one of the words and then develop a grammatically correct 3-word sentence. Well, it comes out, unfortunately, as kick the dog, right? Let's try another one. How about slap his face, right? So there you go. What do we know? Those should affect levels of aggression in the laboratory.